There will be no ice. There will be no snow, unlike the games we've already talked about today in Buffalo and Philadelphia, where weather will be an issue. It can't be an issue in Detroit. They'll be indoors. They'll be nice and toasty. And the Washington Commanders will try to get their second postseason win this year. 19 years since their last one. Could just be 6 days until their next one from when they won on Sunday night. I know the Lions are favored by, like, what is it, 9.5 in this one? Is that what it is? It's some ridiculous spread like that. I tell you what, we've seen the 1 seed in the past since they adopted this format where the 1 and the 2 get a bye and everybody else has to play. Yeah, you got some time off. Yeah, you get to heal up. But you haven't played in 2 weeks. And the team that's coming in to play you has the extra confidence of winning a playoff game, and nobody expects them to win, and they're steep underdogs, and they're going to be loose, and they're not going to care, and you're going to be tight, and your special season is potentially going to pass before your eyes like my life did as I was falling. It didn't. And that's a factor that has resulted in the 1 seed getting bumped out of the postseason in the divisional round. We've seen it happen more than a few times.
Yeah, and I think the Commanders are the kind of team that will make you nervous. Now, I will say before I get into Washington that Detroit really doesn't fit the profile of a lot of those 1 seeds that we're talking about. They're a little rusty. They haven't played in a while. Maybe down the stretch, they're so far ahead of the pack that down the stretch, they, last 2 or 3 weeks, they really were, going in and out. They didn't have any competitive games. They were resting people. Detroit needed every single game just to earn the 1 seed, needed that big win over Minnesota to earn it. And I think, Mike, you see how banged up the team is, especially on defense. They need all the extra time they can get. It has nothing to do with being out of rhythm. It's just getting back to health. They need David Montgomery needed that extra week. I think Alex Anzalone needs the extra week, even though he played against Minnesota. So there are a lot of injured Lions who appreciate that time off. But for Washington, you're right. They're a good team. This is not some bum coming in and you could just, this game will be over by halftime. They're a good team, and they got all the franchise's historical baggage off their backs. 20 years since the playoff win, so now they're like, okay, we're playing with house money, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, both of these teams have had long years, a couple of long decades. The last time they met in the postseason was 1991 in the NFC Championship. That had been the last time until last year that the Lions had played in the NFC Championship. And if the Commanders win, it'll be the first time they've returned to the NFC Championship since that game at RFK Stadium. So high stakes. And you're right. The Lions aren't the dominant team that has blown everyone out, that was able to unplug like the Chiefs did. 24 days between games for Patrick Mahomes. And not blowouts, but enough wins that the hay was in the barn. And that's the benefit of having the Vikings chase the Lions. Because without the Vikings, the Lions would have been able to shut it down earlier than they did. They still had the Eagles to contend with for the number 1 overall seed, but it came down to that last game of the regular season, and it forced the Lions to go all the way through. And they chose to go all out against the 49ers 6 days before that Vikings game, even though the outcome of the 49ers game had no impact on the winner-take-all nature of the Week 18 clash. So the Lions are healthier. And, we talked about this earlier. We on the fly started talking about the top running backs in the NFL. Jahmyr Gibbs has been phenomenal with David Montgomery injured, and it's almost better for the Lions if it's just Jahmyr Gibbs. They're committed to the Sonic and Knuckles approach. Like, the first time I noticed that was, and I know that they had Rocky Bleier and Franco Harris with the Steelers, and there was a year they both had 1,000 rushing yards. But more recently, not all that recently, Mike Allstott and Warwick Dunn in Tampa. You got Montgomery, you got Gibbs, and that's great. But when Gibbs has the potential to be Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry, what do? And it sure sounds like they're going to plug Montgomery back into the same role that he always had, which will keep Gibbs from having the kind of game that we saw against the Vikings in Week 18.
I think they say they're going to do that. Plug him back into the same role. I mean, here's a guy we thought he was out for the season. He gets a second and a third opinion, probably a fourth opinion, and figures out, okay, I can get back for the postseason. He hasn't been there. we saw Jahmyr Gibbs just go crazy against your Vikings. Sorry, I haven't talked to you since then. I'm not trying to bring up old wounds, but we saw what Jahmyr Gibbs did against Minnesota. And so Detroit would be crazy to say, all right, as we were, let's come back. I think they're saying that right now. I wouldn't be surprised if Jahmyr Gibbs gets, 85% of the snaps at running back. I think it's just too early. One, it's too early to bounce back and do that. And two is what you said. He's amazing. Every time the ball is in his hands, it's that Saquon Barkley thing. Every time you kind of gasp and go, oh, is this it? Is this the one? He's going to go 60 yards or 70 yards or do something or spin and make us go, wow, I've never seen that before. So I think the injury allowed Detroit to kind of make this transition.
He had 139 rushing yards against the Vikings, 6 yards per carry, 3 rushing touchdowns, another 31 receiving yards and a touchdown, 4 touchdowns, 170 yards from scrimmage. Whew. And when they were splitting time, the percentage, if I recall correctly, of Gibbs getting the ball when he was on the field was extremely high. Like when he's out there, get this guy the football. And he was doing more per yard, per touch, whether it was a catch or a run, than Montgomery was doing. But, yeah, I like the fact that they have loyalty, but you don't want your loyalty to be one of the reasons why you don't advance. Jahmyr Gibbs is the guy that helps them advance. And here's the key, Michael, because the Commanders, if they can keep it close, they are very dangerous. Gibbs is the guy who helps you not keep it close if you're the Lions. Letting Gibbs do his thing will potentially turn 7-0 into 14-0 into 17-0, and then you just ride it out, and you don't have to worry about Jaden Daniels and company doing what they did to the Buccaneers because the Commanders kept that game close start to finish.
And you know who knows that more than anybody? The Commanders, which is why they're more equipped to do. I feel like I'm picking on Minnesota today. I'm not.
That's all right.
But they're more.
That's all right.
But they're more equipped to do what Minnesota tried to do in that winner-take-all game. Minnesota, hey, we can't settle for field goals. We're going to go for it. And we're going to match the Lions. That's not really you, though. You haven't played like that all year. Now you're going to try to do that in Detroit? You're going to out-Detroit in their building? No. But I tell you who does it. Washington. Washington does fourth downs better at a historic rate. It's unbelievable what they did in the regular season. You saw it last week in Tampa. They go for it. If it's a high percentage player, they go. That's their identity. And so I think when they get into a situation, they know it's not just that field goals can't beat the Lions. They can't. But this is who we are. We're not going to back down. It could be, you know what, Mike? This might be the most fourth down attempts ever. What's the over-under on fourth down attempts in the playoff game? We're going to smash it. Most fourth down attempts ever in a playoff game we're going to see in this matchup.
You're right. And this is a combination of, it really traces back to analytics. Because once analytics became widely accepted, it became the thing. Initially, it was cover for coaches to do something that we otherwise would think was unconventional, because that was the old rule of thumb. If you do something conventional and it doesn't work, you don't get criticized. If you do something unconventional and it doesn't work, you get criticized. If you do it enough, you get fired. Analytics provided the cover for doing the unconventional thing. And then it became unconventional to not follow analytics and not go for it. And now it's also jumbled up with the numbers and who knows what the numbers are and whether you should go for it or not, that when you do go for it, people don't get bent out of shape anymore. It used to be unthinkable to go for it on fourth down in your own territory. I remember when Barry Switzer did it in a game against the Eagles and failed. They wanted to run him out of town. They wanted to run him down anyway for a variety of other reasons. But now when people do it, we're like, oh, that didn't work. Oh, I get it. And we'll get him next time. And because of that, you have some of these teams that just revel in it. And the Commanders do. It helps to have Jaden Daniels, who is unaffected by any situation, who has the poise. And we saw it. I was saying this last week. Hey, this guy's got the poise to go in there and win in the playoffs. He's not going to be affected by the moment. And he's not going to be affected by a 9.5-point spread that has the Lions the clear favorites to beat the Commanders. He probably welcomes that. He probably wants it that way because it's going to be all the more shocking in his mind when the Commanders win the game. I'm not saying they will, but that's the mindset he has.
And also, when you mention analytics, sometimes you can probably guess what the dividing line is. All organizations are not aligned on analytics. Like most of them in the 21st century, most of them do have analytics departments, but sometimes it turns into an us and them situation. Hey, the analytics people said it, but the football people aren't into it. In this game with Detroit and Washington, you get the sense that everybody is on board. It's not the cliche, all the nerds think we should go for it, but they don't understand football. No, I think the football people are probably encouraging the so-called nerds, hey, give us more situations where we can go for it because we want to. And it's the personality of Dan Quinn and Kingsbury and Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson. Like, they are into that kind of stuff. So you're right. It used to be old school. I remember when, and Rodney remembers this, I think it was his first year at NBC, when it was a Patriots-Colts game, and Bill Belichick went for it on 4th and 2. I think it's from his own 27-yard line. And Rodney and everybody else went crazy. I think I did too. Like, what are you doing? You can't do that. You can't go for it. Your own territory, 4th and 2, you got to punt the ball, and you got to give your defense a chance. All the things that we used to say not that long ago. We don't say it as much anymore.
You're right. And it really has been this embrace of analytics as it is being used as a tool for making these decisions. And I think one of the reasons why Dan Campbell has embraced it, it's probably his nature, but, you know, what's happened is the analytics department usually consists of some highly educated, very smart individuals who are more aligned with ownership than they are with the coaching staff. And a former GM explained this to me back when I was going through the process of writing Playmakers, and I was doing a chapter on analytics. And the reality is, in the old days, when the owner would sit down with the coach to do the postmortem on the game, the coach would just word salad his way through football jargon, and the owner, not wanting to open his mouth and confirm that he's a moron, would say nothing.
Right.
Now what happens? A football moron. Not a total moron, although in some cases, a total moron. Some cases, the shoe fits. Now what happens is, at the postmortem, sitting to the left and the right of the owner are the Harvard and Dartmouth grads, the walking supercomputers, who will instantly explain to the owner what is and what isn't bullcrap about the things the coach is saying. It's almost like having a translator in the room. And now that you know the owner is on to you as a coach, you better adapt and you better defer to the math whizzes who are saying into your headset, go for it here. And it's almost like, fine, you want to go for it? We'll go for it all the time. You know, save your breath. 4th and less than 5, we're going for it. Don't even tell me what the numbers are. We're going to become a team that goes for it all the time. We expect it with Dan Campbell now. And we're starting to expect it with Dan Quinn.
And you're right, Mike. You got to get into that situation for that exit interview with the owner. Not only is it, hey, I'm on one side and the owner is on the other side with the Harvard, Yale, Princeton people, and Dartmouth. Throw all the Ivy Leaguers in there.
Cornell, too. Hey, Andy Bernard would want us to mention Cornell.
And Cornell. Hey, Big Red. All right, everybody, throw them on it. I would say you got to get those guys on your side, too. We're not sitting across from each other. Now it's a round table. Because you can, sometimes you got to look at it and say, hey, can't beat City Hall. Okay? We're all in this together. We got to figure it out. And there's some really smart teams. We always say great things about the A-plus students of the NFL, also known as the Baltimore Ravens. And the Ravens have a great analytics department, and the analytics department also has a word in the draft. It's not just game day operations. It's who are we selecting? Like, does this make sense to draft this guy here? What kind of value are we getting if we're going to draft? Do we draft a tight end in the third round in this kind of pool, in this market, or is it better value for us to go in the sixth round because maybe their sixth round guy is not an 85 in Woody Johnson's Madden, but maybe he's an 80, and we can use some selections somewhere else.
That's analytics too, technically, using Madden ratings. It's just a different formula. It's still analytics. We all have our own formulas. But the funny part about
analytics, right? Entertaining
pro
analytics.
Football, nowadays in pro football, the nerds don't get stuffed into the lockers. The nerds are the ones who stuff. And it's great. It's great. And you better defer to the nerds, baby, if you want to stick around. And Dan Campbell is smart enough to know that I better defer, and it's working. Everything's working. It's working for the Commanders because they're keeping games close and they're finding ways to win. Here's Dan Quinn from this week on how playing in so many close games have helped the Commanders get to where they are.
The volume of times we've been in them, John. I think that the experience into those spots, like I talked about earlier, the hard fights, doing it together, you do gain confidence from going through that. And they've been in a lot of close games, not just over the last month or so, but really the entire season with the exception of the first game. And you do grow together. And these guys have really bonded and connected, and they trust one another. And I think that's a big deal. If you have that kind of trust, John, then like the commitment grows and their connection grows. And so the trust of themselves, they trust one another. Like that's a big deal. Not every team has that.
Yeah, look, they've been there, they've done that, and every time it works, the more confident you become it's going to work again. And also it plants a seed of doubt in the opponent's head as the game gets toward the end. Oh, no, we're playing the team that keeps finding ways to win these games late. And that will be a test for the Lions if they find themselves in a close game. Can they maintain their mojo in the face of a team that just keeps finding ways to steal these victories, from the Hail Mary to what we saw last week with the field goal that doinked off the inside of the upright? They just keep finding ways to do it. And it's one of those ingredients when you look back, because every team thinks they're a team of destiny, at least the good teams. The teams that are winning on a consistent basis in the regular season can make themselves think it's their year. This is the kind of stuff, the stuff we've seen the Commanders do one week after another. That's the kind of stuff that is the highlight reel of a team of destiny.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about all the games that they've had, some of them are just crazy. I mean, the Chicago game stands out. They should, come on, you should not be able to win that game. Chicago, most teams have been coached to be in that position where that's not going to happen. They win that game. The doink last week against Tampa, they had a very entertaining back and forth with Dallas in the regular season, where it was the fourth quarter from the video game world. But I think all that being said, it's still a process. I think Washington is where Detroit was maybe last year or the year before, where you've got to turn around. You're a team that's emerging, you're ascending. You're not quite there yet, but you feel good about where you're going. You see some of the flaws that you have. You're able to overcome your flaws and get into the playoffs and win a game. But when you take on somebody who's clearly better than you are, number one seed, then that destiny talk settles down, and you go into the offseason saying, okay, we got a good foundation here. How do we build on it?
That's right. And this was supposed to be just the second year of the turnaround post-Snyder. It wasn't supposed to be special season. And all of a sudden they tripped into it. And when you think of, like, when we were doing our Executive of the Year last week, along with 9 other awards, I looked up the free agency moves that the Commanders made. And it's just a bunch of, I mean, it's not like they went out and spent a ton of money. They didn't have a ton of money to spend. Most of the guys they signed are starters. A lot of them probably won't be starters next year. And they're going to have $100 million to go do their thing.
Wow.
And they're going to get even better. And I remember there was a report back in around the trade deadline, and it felt like a favor to Bob Myers, who's an ESPN basketball analyst who was involved in the resurrection of this franchise with Josh Harris as the owner. The idea that that players are telling their agents we want to be traded to the Commanders. Like, I've never heard that before in 50 years of following the NFL and 25 years of covering it. But I expect it to be true in the offseason, that this is the kind of thing, despite the fact that that stadium is a crap hole, literally, with poop raining from the ceiling. Another
Is it the
office
worst one in the league?
It's the worst. It's the worst. I was there for an international soccer match 7-8 years ago. I couldn't believe it. It's like this thing's only been around 20, 25 years. It's like some ancient relic of Roman times. It's like this place has fallen apart. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh,
agents telling their players that they want to.
This offseason,
players telling their agents. Yeah.
Because the key with free agency is you want to be able to win the ties without putting more money on the table. And if you can actually get the guy with a little less, you're even better off. And I think that the Commanders are in a zone where they can pull that off. This is a great advertisement. I always say if you're thinking about your contract next year as a player, if you're playing in meaningful games in January and most of the other teams are home watching, that helps you. Having a franchise playing in meaningful January games at the time when no one expected it, that helps the franchise because you're going to have guys sitting at home watching the games, trying to figure out what their next move is, like Tyreek Hill. Where am I going to go? And he sees these Commanders games, and I'm not suggesting Tyreek Hill is going to point at the screen and say, I want to play for them. But there's going to be players who feel that way watching these games, especially if the Commanders find a way to knock off the Lions on Saturday night.
And you know what, Mike? It's not even – I don't even think it's players going to their agent saying, hey, get me to this destination. It just becomes a part of – I think when certain teams are always in the playoffs, it becomes a part of that feeling, that warm feeling you get when it's playoff season, it's January, we're going to watch the games. You get used to seeing certain teams there, no matter how successful they are. You get used to seeing the Chiefs there. You get used to seeing the Ravens there, the Steelers. Traditionally, we've seen the 49ers the last few years there, not this year. The Eagles. So you get used to seeing those teams there. Then you get used to seeing teams who they're not going to be there. Okay, so most of us have not gotten used to, in a generation, we're not used to the Commanders being a part of this conversation in January. And so when you become a part of the conversation, that's the recruiting itself. You don't even have to go above and beyond. It doesn't have to be Jaden Daniels reaching out to you. It doesn't have to be Dan Quinn saying, I'd love to coach you. It's just looking around in meaningful games and you see some familiar faces, you say, okay, that's a place I can go and be successful.
Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.